Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Betty Chan. Former South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has officially been removed from office, and political parties have swiftly launched preparations for a special election. Voting for a new president is scheduled for June 3rd. Lee Jae-myung, leader of the main opposition Democratic Party, is widely seen as the frontrunner. Lee once told the Wall Street Journal that some people have compared him to the Korean version of Trump. However, facing Trump 2.0 in the U.S., the next South Korean president is likely to encounter even more significant challenges than their predecessors. We have two guests here to help us analyze how South Korea's new political landscape could reshape Indo-Pacific geopolitics. Joining us today are Liou To-hai, National Chengchi University College of International Affairs Adjunct Distinguished Professor, and Chiew-Ping, East Asian International Relations Caucus co-founder. A warm welcome to both of you on the show. Facing pressure from the U.S. on tariffs and demands for greater cost sharing of U.S. forces stationed in South Korea, building a strong relationship with President Trump will be a significant challenge for South Korea's next leader. Let's first look at Lee Jae-myung, the frontrunner from the opposition party. Lee has previously criticized the Yoon administration's pro-U.S. anti-China foreign policy and made controversial remarks such as, "What does the Taiwan issue have to do with us? And all we need to do is bow and say thank you to China," sparking public backlash at home. However, more recently, he appears to be softening his pro-China image. So I would like to direct my first question to you, Professor Liu. How do you view the political direction that Lee Jae-myung might take if he really gets elected as the next president?
Yes, one of the biggest differences between Yoon Suk Yeol and Lee Jae-myung, the latter one, is very sophisticated and shrewd. So in reality, after the Yoon Suk Yeol's impeachment crisis, Lee Jae-myung already met U.S. and Japanese ambassadors in Seoul in last December. I mentioned about he cherished and the Japan, U.S., South Korea trilateral alliance, and also South Korea's economic relations and the security relations with Japan are also important. So that means he has already gradually repositioning himself from sort of the anti-U.S. or stance or anti-Japanese stance to a central and balanced position.
So, Professor Liu, do you foresee any bigger changes in the future? Will he completely change his attitude from the pro-China, pro-Russia image to becoming a more pro-U.S. or pro-Japan position?
I think he will follow his mentor, late U.S. President Roh Moo-hyun. Roh Moo-hyun, at that time, when he was the president, he emphasized the balanced foreign policy. That means South Korea can serve as a balancer between the two superpowers, United States and China, between China and Japan, between Japan and United States, all the region in Northeast Asia. So in that case, South Korea can be an independent player rather than pro-U.S. or pro-China. So I think he will follow this kind of the fashion. And another example is about Moon Jae-in. So Moon Jae-in actually came the same party as Lee Jae-myung came from. So you can easily find out Moon Jae-in actually played a very active role between North Korea and the U.S. Summit. And he also maintained a very positive relationship with North Korea and China as well. So I think Lee Jae-myung will follow the two predecessors' approach.
Definitely, we can see that if he could strike a balance among this different situation or different stakeholders, that would be quite good for the country. But we do see that, Professor Hoo, there has been growing speculation that if the new South Korean leader does not follow Yoon Suk Yeol's pro-U.S. policy, then the conservative diplomatic strategy promoted by Yoon could end. So do you think that the U.S., Japan, South Korea alliance, which was built under the Biden administration, could risk becoming largely symbolic?
So as South Korea is now preparing for their upcoming presidential election, so several party candidates has ready to announce their candidature bid. So, but I believe that the next upcoming advisory team for the next president of South Korea would be wise to advise their new president to diversify rather than choosing one side. So either pro-US or pro-China, the risk is too high for South Korea. And there is a lot of discussion in South Korea about how to preserve their autonomy and to rebuild their national image following the impeachment trial of Yoon Suk Yeol.
So tell us a bit more about how can South Korea maintain its autonomy or adopt a more diversified approach?
So for example, like Professor Liu has just mentioned, not only South Korea is likely to renegotiate with the United States, they are also going to rebuild relationship with Japan. So there is this belief that a Democratic Party president in South Korea would likely to be anti-Japanese. However, I believe that Lee Jae-myung, if he's elected, he's going to break the mold, so to say. So he's likely to work together with Japan, especially in light of the tariff announcement from the United States. Economically, they need to work closer with Japan. And in terms of security, they also need to depend on Japan more than ever.
Mm-hmm. So it is ideally, if the new leader can strike a balance, that would be very good. However, if the new South Korean leader leans towards China, then do we expect warmer ties between Seoul, Beijing, and Pyongyang, while relations with Japan might become more frosty? Professor Liu?
Possibility is still there. As already Professor mentioned about, who mentioned about, it is likely South Korea's next president is going to continue to enhance its economic collaboration with Japan. That is true. Every time when South Korea suffered any kind of economic crisis, South Korea always improved relations with Japan. And Kim Dae-jung, the former Democratic Party president. Okay? So that's possible. Nevertheless, one thing is for sure. If Lee Jae-myung or anyone from the Democratic Party become the next South Korean president, he is going to improve relations with China, North Korea, even Russia. Why? Nowadays, in South Korea, they are very concerned about the rapidly changing international environment. For example, Russia-Ukraine war, that has brought about the South Korea in a very disadvantageous position. North Korea, leveraging the crisis, joined Russia against Ukraine, right? So that allowed North Korea to get high-tech, military high-tech from Russia, at the same time gaining the military fighting experience. So this is not good for South Korea. At the same time, Russian and China's jet fighters frequently penetrated into South Korea, KDIZ. So South Korea very concerned about this. That's good, not good. All right. So that is why South Korea is very concerned about this. Last one, not the least one, Donald Trump. He has mentioned so many times that he wants to meet Junior King. All right. So he said he has very good positive relations with Kim Jong-un. That is true. He already had 3 summits with Kim Jong-un. So South Korea worried most is if United States directly contact North Korea, in reality, passing over South Korea. Mm-hmm. In that case, South Korea would be in a very dangerous position. You don't know what happened. They are talking about. They might reach a result, and South Korea had no choice but sign. Such as South Korea wants United States to denuclearize North Korea. But now U.S. most people talking about only North Korea nuclear freeze. So that is very good, not good for South Korea. Okay. Even worse than that, if North Korea and United States they decided to establish formal diplomatic relations. All right.
Is that a possibility in your opinion?
Possibility is still there because Donald Trump. So far we have already found out that Donald Trump cannot get China to say yes to the negotiation table. Okay. So he must need something else to push China to come to negotiation table. So in that case, North Korea is a possible choice.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Liu. Definitely, we will talk more about North Korea later. But I would like to turn our attention back to the election. So, Professor Hoo, we talk about the main contender, Lee Jae-myung, from the main opposition party. And we talk about he might adopt a balanced approach. What if other candidates emerge? What if the other candidates get elected? Will there be major variables happening?
So far, there is the People Powers Party candidate. There were two. So one is Ms. Na, who went to meet Yoon Suk Yeol as soon as the Constitutional Court announced the impeachment decision. So highly likely candidate Na would continue Yoon's policy because she saw that Yoon still have a strong support base, including among the South Korean public. So as of today, there is more Yoon supporter rallying around and voice their support, and Yoon again slogan was being shouted on the street. So highly likely if another PPP candidate came back into power, so the US, Japan, South Korea trilateral cooperation, for example, will continue. However, I'm not sure whether they will introduce a wise economic decision because they are but the current acting president, Han Dok-soo, also from the PPP party, he is now ready to renegotiate on the tariff terms with the United States government right now.
Mm-hmm. So, given South Korea's current domestic and external challenges, what will be the better path or the most beneficial way for its future?
Well, I think because South Korea is a smaller country in comparison to its neighbor in Northeast Asia, so to restrike balance with the United States, even with China, because a lot of the South Korean companies still heavily invested in China, and China is still the top trade, one of the top trade partner, even though US has come up back on top as well. So South Korea need to rethink about re-engaging not only with Japan, Europe, but also with Southeast Asia as well. Southeast Asian market collectively actually occupy top 3 position for South Korea in terms of trade. So for South Korean next president to no matter they are from TPP or DP, they should actually reconsider how to ensure, for example, semiconductor supply chain resilience and their security conditions, which also is related to North Korea and also China.
Mm-hmm. So definitely we have to keep watching the situation
Absolutely.
And how it's going to develop. The ouster of Yoon Suk Yeol has plunged South Korea into political turmoil, just as President Trump is imposing tariffs on countries worldwide. At this critical juncture, Seoul now finds itself leaderless, raising concerns about the potential long-term impact. Since Trump took office, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has already visited Washington for talks with Trump, followed by French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In contrast, South Korea's absence from these meetings with allies is becoming increasingly pronounced. So this time we talk about the so-called reciprocal tariffs proposed by President Trump. So he announced reciprocal tariffs of 25% on South Korea, 24% on Japan, and 32% on Taiwan. How significant is these tariffs on Japan and South Korea? Professor Liu.
Oh, yes. For South Korea, it's very important because South Korea could be one of the biggest losers of Donald Trump's tariff war. Why is that so? Because South Korea, in terms of its manufacturing basis, primarily focusing on China and Vietnam and other ASEAN countries, but in particular those 2 countries. So, for example, you can easily find out EV batteries. South Korea relied heavily on China's market and key components. So this EV battery factories most in China. And then the Samsung, the Samsung, the electronic smartphone, still the #1 global market share. Half of the Samsung smartphone produced in Vietnam. All right? So in that case, this time you can easily find out Donald Trump focused on China's and its production basis in Southeast Asia, even in South Asia like India, in order to force them away from China, push them back to the U.S. or help the U.S. to impose the higher tariff on Chinese components. So that in that case, this is horrible for South Korea. So that is why South Korea has to balance its relationship with both superpowers. For Japan, less impact. Why I say so? Because Japanese auto sectors, most of them actually in Mexico. So in that case, not in this region. That means Japan hasn't leveraged Southeast Asia and China too much, primarily focused on North America or Mexico. So Japan is more worried about Mexico in that case. So anyway, so I think tariff war has brought about tension for everyone in this region because we are export-oriented economies.
Yes, so of course Taiwan has been affected, but in your opinion, Professor Hoo, how has South Korea been affected? And do you think that because of this tariff from the United States, will this push, say, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea or other countries away from the United States and closer to China?
So even though South Korea is now without a president, but their current acting president, Han Duck-soo, luckily he was a trade minister before and a former economics professor. So he's very ready to talk to the US government, and I believe on this issue, they will receive bipartisan support in South Korea. So I think the U.S. More than anyone else would need the countries to renegotiate the tariff on their terms, because iPhone alone require Japan, South Korea, Taiwanese components, for example. So if tariff rate does not change, in the next iPhone may cost 52% more expensive than the current device. So, so for South Korea, it's very naturally that they wanted to work together with Japan, Taiwan, and the other allies. As of now, I think last week, as soon as the tariff was announced by the United States, China, South Korea, and Japan trade ministers has already met. So Chinese government released a statement on how the three countries would work closer together. But South Korea and Japan has released their own statement showing that while collectively these countries will work together, but they will also introduce their unilateral policy on how to savior their own situation.
So, Professor Hu, you talk about the joint meeting between China and also Japan and South Korea. The trade ministers have worked together. It's been 5 years since these three countries, their trade ministers, to get together. What does this signal? Professor Liu, do you think that this means Beijing, Tokyo, and Seoul are ready to coordinate and to have greater cooperation to resist the pressure from the United States? Or it's just trade, nothing else?
I think it's very likely because Donald Trump has already waged the war of the tariff against this region, even though it's globally, but actually this region, as I said, he's focusing on the supply chain of the China. So in that case, all the countries, including Taiwan, we all suffered because we all use the ASEAN countries as a very important production base in order to export to the United States. But now, so that is why China, Japan, Korea, they decided to resume their trilateral FTA negotiation. At the same time, the RCEP, 15 countries, they are also decided to enhance their economic collaboration, served as background or in case U.S. continue to use this kind of tariff war. It's up to Donald Trump. He wants to make this war a long-term war or very short-term one. If very short-term one, it might not change right away. But if it's a long-term war, of course, it's very likely China is going to take the most benefit of this tariff war, because everybody is with China and with this region, and this region is export-oriented region.
And definitely we hope this is a short-term, you can say transition, or maybe hopefully it's just something short-term, not going to be prolonged for too long. So regarding, we talk about trade, we talk about the tariffs. Now let's move on to the defense strategy. U.S. Defense Secretary just recently visited the Philippines and Japan, emphasizing the importance of the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty in the face of the rising threats from China. However, during this trip by the Defense Secretary, South Korea was not included. So though we know there's an acting president in Seoul, there is still no actual leader in the country. What impact or losses could this have on South Korea's international diplomacy and also its position in regional geopolitics, Professor Hoo?
So currently, because South Korea doesn't have a defense minister, because he was the previous one, he was involved in the martial law crisis as well. So, so understandably, U.S. Defense Secretary couldn't meet anyone in Seoul for that reason. However, we can also see that discussion about Korean Peninsula security are still taking place. So not only in Seoul, but also in Switzerland recently, there was a meeting convened between Chinese, Russian, and South Korean and Japanese officials. So they were talking about how relationship with North Korea would be going forward. For example, special envoy from each government actually gathered to discuss this issue. So I believe that South Korea is ready to continue whichever policy that they are going to adopt, whether Trump is ready to meet with Kim Jong-un or not.
Talking about Kim Jong-un, on the same day that South Korea confirmed the impeachment of Yoon Suk Yeol, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited a Special Operations Forces training base. And with South Korea's domestic political turmoil, what will be the real situation of Northeast Asia? And also, Professor Liu and both Professor Hoo, you have talked about maybe the personal and close relationship between President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. What's the future hold first in terms of the Korean Peninsula, Professor Liu?
Yeah, actually, South Korea now is very concerned about U.S. New strategy, because Hagasize already mentioned about the interim national defense strategic guidance specified U.S.'s number one priority is to prioritize the deterring China, while when it comes to Russia and North Korea ventures, they will be managed by U.S. allies. So that means a sort of strategic OEM for Japan, in particular, South Korea. But worst thing for South Korea, Hagasize told South Korea, in case anything happened across Taiwan Strait or other cases like Philippines case, U.S. has no choice but put U.S. interest as number one priority. That means U.S. will redeploy the American forces in South Korea to Guam or other places to assist the Americans deterring China. So in that case, South Korea is not horrible, because already under Yoon Suk Yeol, South Korea's relations with North Korea already reached the lowest level, and even severed their relations completely. So that's not good. So in that case, Donald Trump directly contacted Kim Jong-un and talking about this, anything happened across the strait, and then U.S. forces in the South Korea has changed its role and readjust its role. In that case, everything is against South Korea. So it's very dangerous for South Korea. So that is why I think Moon Jae-in and Lee Jae-myung, these kind of progressive forces might help the South Korea to alleviate this kind of crisis. Because Lee Jae-myung, if he comes to power, he will improve relations with North Korea. So in that case, North and South, at least they have this connection. And also, he can have a better relations with China. So can use the China card against the U.S., U.S. against China. And in that case, it's good for South Korea.
Indeed, we all understand the situation is extremely complicated. If Trump does engage with Kim Jong-un again, possibly without South Korea at the table, do you think that this would be repeating what has happened back in 2018, 2019, where Seoul was largely watching from the sideline? Professor Hoo.
This is definitely a top concern for South Korea, so no matter which party would win the next presidential election. So the reason being, North Korea, Kim Jong-un already announced that they no longer believe in reunification, so they are highly likely not going to engage South Korea anymore. They even designate South Korea as the primary enemy, not the United States. So for Trump, they have top officials in the State Department. The number 3 is Miss Alison Hooker. She was there in both Singapore and Hanoi when Trump met Kim Jong-un. So with such officials within the administration, they might be very supportive for re-engagement with Kim Jong-un. However, North Korea also show indications of change right now. For example, not only at the moment they are opening up for international event, marathon has been re-held in Pyongyang, and China-North Korea exchanges has been normalized. From top-level government official visit to people-to-people exchange has been normalized across border right now. So does that mean Kim Jong-un is ready to talk to Trump? We don't know yet. So this would be the deliberation would be conducted in Washington, D.C. before they advise Trump to take the next step.
So what will be your prediction? Do you think that this kind of summit will happen again between Trump and Kim?
So if Kim Jong-un would agree, that means that he's trying to try another hand with Trump. If he's not, that is because he's currently very comfortable with its deepened relations with Russia and also the recently normalized exchanges with China.
So definitely we have to keep a close eye on what's going to happen on the Korean Peninsula. But in the meantime, in Taiwan, we also have to be watching closely what's going to happen and how it's going to affect ourselves. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for sharing with us your insights. If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.